Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Chicago Trader checking in for the weekly fundamental video. Hope you guys have a nice weekend here. Want to do this one a little bit different. Not a whole lot of names, that moved this week were kind of worthy of a video, and even the last couple weeks, just a few little names moving, but nothing too intriguing. But so I ended up on the weekend mentoring and questions, asking some of the things that you guys want to see covered. So I'm going to go over a few of those today, and just a few other things. So first and foremost, Taj brought up a great point. I obviously am going over BAMSEC. Highly recommend it. I believe it's $25 a month. A little bit more user friendly in my opinion than SEC.gov. And I'll go over just kind of how it's structured, why I use it, and just a few other things. But first things, obviously you have the financials, the news, right, the prospectuses. So, it's just going to have their, Q1, Q2, Q3, and then their 10K. If it's a, a foreign issuer, these will not be updated. They'll just do the 10Ks. News, as you guys know, I've been asked this question a little bit. What do I look for? Obviously, it's just kind of news in the last, 4 or 5 months. So one of the things too I do is I get the cash. I try to figure out the cash, see if they have any access to, an ATM or a credit line. See if they have availability to get some cash, if they can dilute, or if they have, a way to get money. If they don't, I want to come back here and look at the most recent, 8Ks, because a lot of the 8Ks guys, they'll have news of, contracts or agreements, and they get some money up front. So in case you missed it last week, last week or 2 weeks ago, Take Two was one. It was a little bit low on cash. I mean, not desperate. They had a recent ATM, so that was one thing. But if you come to this 8K, they were going to be up to, this agreement that they had was going to be up to $63 million, but it also got $6 million up front. So again, that's not something you'll see in the most recent 10Q, right? Because that 10Q is filed on the August 2nd. This news came out on September 9th. So, when you see a lot of people say that, something's low on cash, but, you got to obviously look at the recent agreements to make sure in cases like this that, they don't have a little bit coming to them anyways. So you're gonna have the news. So these are all the offerings, right? The S3, as you guys know, shelf. D, these are pipes. This is a direct offering, which was probably pulled from the shelf. Proxies. Somebody asked too, if you can't find the float, you can go through the proxies. It takes a little while. Definitely takes some time to get used to, but you can go through. It shows the ownership filings. You kind of got to sort out. What is actual ownership of stock and what is, like, some of these insiders have a lot of stock options and, things that will come in warrants that they have, or grants rather. Ownership, this is something I haven't touched on a lot, but I'm going to go over here with in a second. And then these are mostly just, the only thing I look for here is the effect. Again, guys, if you haven't seen in the previous videos, this is an S3, right? How do you know if it has an effect? You can click on this SEC Edgar, click on the file number, and boom, it has the effect, as you can see. And they've actually already had a 424B on it. What was I saying? Oh, so, and another, this is kind of stemming off of the BAMSEC website. So this is great, the stuff they have over here, the ownership, insider transactions, transcripts. So I don't use all this, but some of it is handy. One of the things that's extremely handy, you can see the ownership by owners. So VTVT, if you guys know, it's a pretty unique situation. And I'll go over this in a second. So Ron Perlman is a billionaire. I think he's worth $4 or $5 billion. This is his company. They own 80% of this company, VTVT. So if we come back here, it has, I believe, I think this is, it's a little bit higher, but they own, there's about 50 million shares, 51 million shares now. But he owns, if you come down here to his subsidiary, so they own 47 million shares, which is 81% of the company. So this is actually one of the cases where if you come to FinViz, it's fairly accurate, right? 55 million, and then the float's 8 million, because you can see about 82% of the company is owned by him. So what does that mean? So if this gaps up, let's just say tomorrow to $3, $3.50, will this trade like an 8 million float? And the question is not necessarily. And why do I say that? So again, in theory, let's say this gaps up on good volume to 350 tomorrow. So he's been buying shares, I mean, forever in this company. If you kind of scroll down. So these shares, let's just assume that he's bought some shares here this day. Let's say he bought 1 million shares on the 18th, which was just a few days ago. Could he sell those? And the answer is no. He is, when you own over 10% of a company, you're considered an insider, and you have restrictions. You can't flip the stock when you own over 10%. You have to hold it for 6 months, which it's not coincidental, guys, that sometimes when you look at these ownership filings that people will own 9.99%, right, because you're under that threshold. Also, when you see people that have that 9.99%, a lot of times they'll get warrants. Warrants are not considered, shares, so it's a way around the 10% ownership. But let's go back again. So I want to touch on this. So, VTVT, let's assume it has, 52 million OS. Ron owns, how much was it, just so I'm right? 47. So he owns 47 million shares. So what does that mean? So really, you could assume that the float's closer to 5 million. Let me see if it has the outstanding shares now. Bear with me for a second, guys. Okay, so there's 58. So sorry, I was off on that. So there's 58. He owns 57. So the float would actually be 11 million. So if this gaps up to 350, will it trade like at 11 million? I said not necessarily. And let me explain why. Because these shares that he bought on, just a few days ago, restricted. But if you look back here, let's say he bought 10 million shares this day, which is, he didn't, but in theory. And that was 7 months ago. So could he sell these 10 million shares if it gaps up tomorrow? And the answer is yes. So why would that not be, if he owns 10 or 47 million, it gaps up, and let's say he gets rid of 10 million. So he owns 37 million. Well, what happened to that 10 million shares? Well, they got dumped on the float, right? So then the next day, let's say it somehow held up, the float would actually be 21 million, right? Because he had restricted shares because he owns over 10%, and he dumps them from the OS to the float. So it's one of those things that's you got to look more into than it just has an high institutional ownership. Like this thing's going to trade like a low float. Like no, they could. Some of those institutions can dump into strength. So that was one thing. Another thing too, when you're looking, you'll see a lot of people post that a certain insider or somebody's buying shares. There's a big difference between buying in the open market, right? Just saying, hey, go buy some at at the market price, and a CEO or an insider of the company being granted stock options or through a grant. So how do you distinguish whether the CEO went out in the open market and had a lot of conviction and bought them, or he was just entitled to stock options or grants? So one of the companies, CBM, it's a very cult-like stock. There was some people saying that, hey, the CEO bought some shares on the open market. So here on the 5th, you can see this is the CEO of the company, owns 1.1 million shares, and somebody said he bought, and then he bought 3,400 at 716. So this is not an open market purchase. He did not go to the open market and buy it. And how do I know that? This code A is acquired. So he acquired these shares through either stock options or grant. If he bought these in the open market, there would be a P here. He purchased them in the open market. So let me see. So then that's another great thing about BAMSEC, insider transactions. So look at it. This is what it shows: open market purchases only. So if you look here on the 17th, which is just a few days ago, the senior VP, John, sold 8,000 shares in the open market at 869, and he received this amount of money. Let me see if I can get on this. Yeah, so he sold these. Let me see if I can get a purchase. Give me 1 second here, guys. Yeah. So here's a great example. So John, he purchased 15,000 shares at 58 cents, and then there's another that he acquired through stock options or grants, which it's still pretty good. He only bought most of his shares in the open market. So that's pretty much for BAMSEC or BAMSEC. If you go through like some of these larger companies, you can come through here. It's really cool. Like the business overview is a really cool thing. It has kind of what the company does, their strategy, the products. You can see competition, backlog. How many employees they have. They're 132,000 full-time employees. So if you go through a lot of these smaller companies, they won't even have this. Um, Another good thing I know a lot of people play large cap earnings. They have the transcripts here if you want to read them, I guess. Um, so it literally has word for word the earnings call. What else do we have on here? Oh yeah, so I've covered the baby shelf a few times. Um, so it's pretty simple. So most of these companies that are under 75 million with MVPHS, which is the market value of publicly held shares, aka the float. If they're under it, most of the time they are restricted, but a company can be under the baby shelf or under the 75 million and still be not restricted to the baby shelf. So when they file an S3, let's say they file it in May, and they're above the baby shelf, the market cap or the market value of the float is, let's say, 80 million when they file an S3. Then 2 months later, let's say the value of the float's 40 million. Are they restricted because they're under 75 million? The answer is no. So if they go above it for a day and it closes above that $75 million threshold for a single day, the company is going to be unrestricted to the baby shelf until they file their next 10K. So again, one day above it. That's why sometimes you got to, if a company is under this baby shelf, it gaps up on news, right? And they have some incentive to hold it up to get just one day above that 75 million, and they can close, offer a lot more shares that day or for the rest of the year. Another thing too was securities purchase agreements. I got a couple questions on these. So these are becoming more common, and all it is, basically, it gives the issuer, basically the company, the right to put securities to an investor. So you'll see some of them are a set amount. Let's just say $10 million at a certain price, or some are up to a certain amount. And really, the only thing it is basically a way for the company to access cash, and the most important thing. Is that they are unregistered shares. So a lot of times you'll see like Aspire does them, Aspire Capital, Lincoln Park. So some of those are, they're similar to Maxims where they're raising cash for the company. What else was there? So yeah, the weekend mentoring. Another thing, I've covered this a little bit, and you can just watch some of the videos of what I look for. ATMs. There's various names, as I mentioned a myriad of times. EDAs, and other forms of recent dilution, cash levels, debt. So sometimes, again, as I kind of mentioned, just because something is low on cash, if you see something that's low on cash but never does an offering, most likely they have, a credit level or a credit line to where somebody, they can borrow up to a certain amount. Maybe they have some private placements out there. I obviously look for convertible debt, preferred shares, recent 8K. So a lot of times too, what will happen with 8K, so you'll notice here I say it's looking for a rehashable news. So sometimes things will come out in filings, and then a day or two later they'll hit the news feed, Trade the News or Benzinga, and the thing will pop, but it's already known. And as I mentioned, kind of in that Take Two TTOO, I'm if something's low on cash, I just want to make sure the recent 8Ks, they haven't received any money up front. Because, if they're low on cash, they can raise, and they don't really have access to warrants or a credit line. There is a lot more incentive to get it higher and try to, do an offering. But again, hey, this one, I like this one, guys. So again, if you guys can, have more questions like this, it makes my life a little bit easier when the week's a little slow. But if I missed anything, be sure to let me know, and I'll cover it next week's video. So have a nice weekend, guys, and we'll see you tomorrow in chat.